Friends, in this new session, I will discuss about the topic flowers. What are flowers through diagrams, then what is pollination, different types of pollination, your artificial pollination, and your fertilization. So let's go. First of all, let me increase the size of the picture. Yes. So friends, you can see I have written flowers. So first of all, we have to understand what are flowers. Flowers are basically the organs of reproduction of flower bearing of seed bearing plants, right? Which they are also known as angiosperms. Now what is the function of a flower? The function of a flower is to form seeds. Then, as we all know, then when seeds are formed, they will germinate into new plants under favorable conditions. Now, yeah, flowers basically they differ. You must have seen that there are variety colors of flowers, like some are yellow, some are green, some are purple, some are blue, but their structure remains the same. Means that the structure of a flower will always remain the same, though there can be a change in its color, right? But the structure remains the same. So what is the structure of a flower? A flower consists of four whorls. It consists of four whorls which are arranged in a fixed order, right? Which are arranged in a fixed order on a fleshy base known as thalamus. You can see over here. This is the thalamus. It is also known as receptacle. It is known as receptacle. So what are those four whorls? Your corolla, right? Sepal, your calyx, then anther and filament comes in your androecium, and stigma, style, ovary, ovule comes in gynoecium. So first corolla, calyx, androecium and gynoecium. क्या कहते हैं the outer two whorls जो होते हैं हमारे कोरोला एंड कैलिक्स, राइट? ये आउटर टू whorls होते हैं, कोरोला और calyx. They basically do not take part in reproduction, but the inner two whorls, that is your androecium and gynoecium, they takes part in reproduction. Fine. So what I was saying, that corolla and calyx, which are the outer two whorls, they take part in reproduction, whereas your androecium and gynoecium, they do not take part in reproduction, whereas your androecium and gynoecium, which are the inner two whorls, they take part in reproduction. Now, the flowers which have all the four whorls, that is petals, sepals, androecium and gynoecium, they are known as complete flowers, and since they are having both androecium and gynoecium, they are also known as bisexual flowers or hermaphrodite flowers. Examples, your hibiscus, rose and petunia. Right, so over here these comes in your complete flowers. So let me show you something. Complete flowers, right? Why they are complete? Because they have sepal, that is your calyx, they also have corolla, and they also have gynoecium, right? That is why they are basically known as complete flowers or hermaphrodite or bisexual flowers. Now, incomplete flowers, friends, are basically those type of flowers which are either having androecium or gynoecium. So if they're having, androecium is basically the male part of a flower, gynoecium is female. So what happens is that if it is having only androecium, so it will be known as pistillate flowers, as androecium is also known as pistil. Gynoecium, sorry, then it will be known as staminate flowers. If androecium is there, it will be known as staminate flowers. If gynoecium is there, it will be known as pistillate flowers, because androecium are known as stamens and gynoecium is pistil. Fine. So now incomplete flowers are also done. The examples of famous examples of incomplete flowers, you can take your papaya and maize. Currently I am not having their picture, or I would have showed you. Now neutral flowers, now from the word neutral only you can understand that when the flowers consist no androecium also and no gynoecium also, right? And some examples of this neutral flowers are your ray florets of sunflower. So let me first clear all these things so that if you after watching this video you won't get confused. And let me give a recap again of this page. So let me, for point number one, flowers angiosperms function to form seeds into plants. Four parts: calyx, corolla, androecium, gynoecium. Where they are present in the thalamus. Flowers though they color variety is different, structure remains same. Complete flowers which have all these four whorls. Incomplete flowers either androecium or gynoecium. Neutral flowers, no androecium and no gynoecium. Clear? Now I am going to the next page. Over here it is. Let me insert it. Yes, now it is fine. So now pollination. See, for fusion of gametes to occur, right? For fusion of gametes to occur and seeds to be formed. Now, why I've said seeds to be formed is very common. When gametes fusion will be there, then only seeds will be formed. So, for fusion of gametes to occur and seeds to be formed, the process of pollination is performed. Now, from this only you can identify its theory. From the diagram only, the process of pollination says when pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the another flower of the same species, or if the pollen grains are transferred to another flower of another plant of the same species. This process is known as pollination, right? Now, pollination is characterized into again two types, that is your self pollination and your cross pollination. In self pollination, what happens? The pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Means the plant remains the same and just flowers. Cross pollination, what happens? Now see the difference I am talking about. In self pollination, what happens? You can see flowers are there on the same plant, but in cross population, two different flowers are there on two different plants, but the species is same. In self pollination, what happens? That pollen grains are produced in small quantity, and in cross pollination, they are basically produced in large quantity. The flowers of pollen grains are not so much attractive, but cross pollination is attractive. So now the wind, insects, and water, all these pollinations come under your cross pollinations, right? Now, if I talk, because all these require agents and cross pollination also requires agents, but self pollination it does not require agents. Over here, cross pollination agents means like your wind and all, water and all. So first, wind. Wind cross pollination is known as anemophily. In wind pollination, what happens, right? For example, the pollen grains are basically produced in large quantities. Why they are produced in large quantities? So that at least one pollen grain can reach the stigma of a flower. Because since they are carried by wind, so surety rate is very less. That is why they are produced in large quantity. The style projects out and has a large feathery stigma. Why they have large feathery stigma? So that the pollen grains which are flying in the wind can be easily received by them. And the pollen grains are very light in weight so that they can be easily carried. Example, you can take like rice, wheat, and maize. Insects pollination and entomophily, this process is very simple. For example, one flower over there, insect came, the pollen grains from on the anther, the pollen grains will stick to his body. When he will visit the stigma of the flower, the pollen grains will get transferred. Now in this process, what happens? The flowers are basically very brightly colored and often scented. For example, your marigold and rose, and some also have sweet smelling. For example, your night jasmine. Water hydrophily. Now, water hydrophily, for example, it occurs in hydrilla and vallisneria. In Vallisneria, what happens, for example, the male flower, since on maturity it gets detached, so it floats on the surface of water, and the female flower is having a long stalk, so when they come in contact, the pollen grains get transferred. Now, one pollination I have not mentioned over here, pollination by animals. What happens? Pollination by animals is carried by birds and squirrels, and these animals carries pollination in those flowers which are very large and grow on long trees. For example, a silk cotton tree. Now I will discuss about artificial pollination. What is artificial pollination? Artificial, now these factors and these types of pollination were all natural, right? In artificial pollination, what happens? Two different varieties of a plant is taken, and first of all varieties are taken, but with the varieties also have certain desired characteristics. For example, it could be high yielding, means it can produce more crops in a less time, or it could be disease resistant, right? So when the varieties are selected, crop breeding is done to produce the plant which is having the desired or combined characteristics that from the parent varieties, right? So the new plant which is produced, it is of a better quality. It could have any characteristics except of high yielding and disease resistant, right? Artificial pollination occurs in a rice, wheat, and maize. Now let me explain its process. For example, there is a flower. For example, this is a flower. Wait a minute, for that I have to go to my next frame, sorry, previous frame. Wait a minute, wait a minute. Yes. For example, this is a flower, and for example, suppose you have removed this androecium, right? This androecium have been removed. So what will happen is that the gynoecium will be left. What will be left? The gynoecium will be left. So when gynoecium will be left over, so when gynoecium will be left, what will happen? It will be covered under a muslin bag. It will be covered under a muslin bag. Why it will be covered under a muslin bag? In order to prevent the natural pollination. Fine. So what will happen after the time when the stigma becomes mature? The pollen grains are introduced from that plant which you have chosen. So what will happen? Fusion will occur, seed will be formed. It's that seed will give into a good variety of a plant, right? So this was all about artificial pollination. Now I will discuss about fertilization. Yes, this is its diagram. Wait a minute now. First delete these things. Yeah, now it is fine. Fertilization. Now what happens in fertilization is, for example, the pollen grains, when they reaches on the stigma, they swells and begins to grow into a pollen tube that travels down through the style to reach an ovule inside the ovary. To reach an ovule inside the ovary, the nucleus of the pollen tube which is there, right, it is having two male nuclei. Each travels down through the pollen tube to fuse with the female egg cell. Fusion occurs, a gamete is formed, right? Sorry, a gamete, not a gamete is formed, actually zygote is formed. That the name is zygote over here. So don't write gamete and all, write the correct name, which is zygote. Then the zygote grows into an embryo grows into seed. After fertilization, sepals, petals, stamen, stigma, style, they all fall off, they all wither away, right? Or the ovule which is there on the ovary, it is having a fertilized cell, all know zygote, right? Zygote grows into embryo into seed. So we can say that a seed is basically so then the ovule which is there, the fertilized mature ovule, it changes into seed. So a seed is a mature and a fertilized ovule which develops into plant under favorable conditions. So this was the whole process of fertilization. And sometimes apples and all, you must have seen. Now what happens, ovule changes into seed, and we all know ovary into fruit. Now someone asks you the question where fertilization takes place. You will give the answer ovary or ovules. Many students commit this error. Friends, always give the answer ovule, because in this only the seed is formed, right? This only changes into seed and then into plant. So always give the answer ovule, not ovary. Then what happens, some are false roots like apple or pear, because what happens that the ovary which is there, it is not forming the main fleshy part which is at the center. It only consists of seed. Now I will discuss about last, that is your germination. Yeah, over here it is. Yes, now I will discuss about germination. So you must have seen that the seed which is there, right? When you remove the seed coat, you will find the embryo or the baby plant. The embryo basically consists of two cotyledons and an embryonal axis. Embryonal axis is basically a, can say, a small curved like structure over here. The cotyledons are attached to the embryonal axis. The embryonal axis again consists of two parts. The lower part, known as the radicle, which is there, it forms a root system, and the upper part, which is a small leafy-like structure, it is plumule, it forms a shoot system. So when a dormant or a sleeping embryo, it becomes active and develops into a new plant in a favorable condition, that is water, oxygen, and a suitable temperature. After that, it develops into a new plant. This whole process is known as germination. This whole process is known as germination. So with this I end my video over here. In my next video I will discuss about sexual asexual reproduction, what is vegetative propagation, artificial methods of vegetative propagation. So by the time, thank you and have a nice day.